The world of Dravak 9 was a forgotten planet lost in the silent corners of the Imperium, covered in red dust and silent plains that stretched endlessly beneath a sky the color of iron. Captain Marius and his regiment, the 117th Terran Guard, were sent there under the belief that it was an abandoned mining colony. But from the moment their boots touched the crimson soil, a strange feeling gripped them all. The ground seemed alive, faintly pulsing beneath their feet as if the world itself was breathing. There was no wind at first, no sound except the crunch of armored steps, yet something invisible lingered in the air, watching them. Marius felt it the strongest, a quiet pressure at the back of his mind, soft at first but growing heavier as night came. The first camp was built beside a ruined fortress half buried in sand, its walls carved with symbols that none could understand. The tech priests said it was ancient, far older than any record of imperial colonization. But Marius didn't want to hear about old ghosts. He only wanted to finish the mission, report the planet secure, and leave this cursed place behind. But that night, while he stood watch beneath the dim light of 2 moons, the wind finally began to move, carrying whispers that made no sense at first, like broken words torn apart by distance. He thought it was the men talking in their sleep, until one of them awoke screaming, his hands clawing at his helmet, shouting that something was calling his name. The medics tried to calm him, but he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "It knows me." The next day they buried him in the red soil, though the ground seemed to drink the blood too quickly. From that point everyone felt uneasy. The whispering continued, sometimes faint, sometimes close enough to make the air vibrate in their helmets. Marius tried to keep his soldiers focused, ordering patrols and pretending everything was normal, but every night the whispers grew clearer. They began to form words that he could almost understand, promising him strength, power, and victory that would never fade. The offers came with warmth that spread through his chest whenever he felt anger or fear, a warmth that made his limbs feel stronger and his mind sharper. He didn't tell anyone, but when he held his weapon he could feel a strange pulse within it, matching the beat of his own heart. On the 4th day, one of the sentries disappeared without a trace. His footprints led away from camp, stopping in the middle of the desert as though he had vanished into thin air. The ground at the spot where he stood was darker, stained like dried blood. The soldiers whispered that the planet was cursed, but Marius silenced them. He told them fear was the enemy, though he felt it crawling under his own skin. At dusk, the wind began to howl across the wasteland, carrying the smell of iron and smoke. The men gathered near the fires, silent, staring into the darkness where shapes moved at the edge of sight. They were tall, armored figures of shadow that vanished when lights turned toward them. That night Marius dreamed again. He saw rivers of blood running uphill toward a great throne made of skulls. A massive figure sat upon it, his eyes burning like suns, his voice deep enough to shake the world. "You are strong," it said, "but strength without fury is wasted." Marius woke covered in sweat, his heart pounding like drums of war. Outside, a storm of red dust was rising, swirling around the camp in spirals that almost looked alive. He stepped out, gripping his rifle, but what he saw made him freeze. The storm moved with purpose, shapes twisting inside it like warriors locked in endless battle. Lightning flashed within the clouds, revealing countless faces screaming in silence. The ground trembled, and for a brief moment Marius felt that same voice echoing inside his mind again, not as a whisper, but as a command. "Fight," it said. "Become more." He dropped to one knee, struggling to breathe, and for an instant his vision blurred. He saw himself not as a man, but as something larger, covered in red armor, his hands stained with victory. Then it was gone. The storm faded as suddenly as it came, leaving the camp in silence. When morning came, the men found strange markings carved into their armor, symbols that no one remembered drawing. Marius told them to remove the marks, but they couldn't. The metal itself had changed. The tech priests called it impossible. Marius didn't argue. Deep down, he knew the truth. The planet was no longer just a world. It was alive, awake, and hungry. And somewhere beneath their feet, something ancient was stirring, its heartbeat now matching his own, He tried to ignore it, but as he turned toward the horizon, he swore he saw movement far away. A figure standing in the red haze, watching him, waiting for him to answer the call. The figure in the red haze did not vanish when the sun rose. It simply grew clearer, as though daylight revealed what darkness had only hinted at. Captain Marius watched it from the ridge above the camp, unable to look away. It stood tall and still, its shape distorted by the wind, wrapped in armor that glimmered faintly beneath the dust. He tried to use his scope, but every time he focused, the image blurred as if the air itself rejected the truth. When he blinked, it was gone, leaving only red mist swirling where it had stood. That morning his men were restless. Some claimed they heard drums in the distance, faint at first but growing louder with every passing hour, like a heartbeat echoing through the soil. The tech priests said their sensors were malfunctioning. The planet's magnetic field was unstable. But Marius knew that wasn't it. He could feel it too, deep inside him, a pulse that matched his own. He ordered the men to pack up camp and move east, away from the ruins, but no matter how far they marched, the horizon never changed. The same red dunes rolled endlessly. The same ruins appeared again, half buried in sand, as if the planet itself refused to let them leave. One soldier, Private Harlan, broke down, shouting that they were walking in circles, that the world was alive and laughing at them. Marius struck him across the face to silence his panic. But when he looked down at his hand, he saw faint traces of steam rising from his palm, as though his touch had burned hotter than it should. That night, the dreams returned, louder, clearer. The voice spoke again, heavy and patient, its tone filled with cruel affection. "You fight your fear well, mortal," it said. "But fear is not your enemy, it is your weapon." Marius saw flashes of battles beyond number, soldiers roaring with fury, blades cutting through endless hordes, a sea of fire and thunder where anger became strength. He woke gasping, his body trembling with energy that felt like molten metal in his veins. Around him, the camp was silent except for the soft crackling of dying fires. Then came the scream, a single long cry that froze every man in place. Marius ran toward it and found two guards locked in combat, their faces twisted with rage, striking each other with bare fists until one stopped moving. When they pulled the survivor away, his eyes glowed faintly red, and he spoke with a voice that wasn't his own. "Blood is truth," he whispered before collapsing. Panic spread. The men wanted to leave, but the transports wouldn't start. Even the air felt heavier, pressing down like invisible hands. By dawn, several soldiers began carving strange symbols into their armor, claiming it protected them from the whispers. Marius tried to stop them, but every order he gave was met with hollow stares. They were changing, slowly, subtly. Some grew stronger, faster, but also more violent. They fought over food, over shadows, over the sound of the wind. The heartbeat beneath the ground grew louder, shaking the earth in slow, steady waves. It was as though the planet itself demanded a sacrifice. Marius stood in the center of the camp, clutching his weapon, trying to drown the voice in his head, but it no longer whispered. It shouted, urging him to embrace the fury, to release the restraint that made him weak. He looked up at the blood-colored sky and shouted back, demanding to know what it wanted from him. The storm answered. Red lightning tore through the clouds, striking the ruins, sending waves of sand rippling across the plain. From within that storm, shapes began to emerge, silhouettes of armored warriors marching without sound. Their armor shone crimson like molten iron, and their faces were hidden behind skull-like helms. They carried massive weapons that gleamed with fresh blood, though no wound had been made. The guardsmen fired wildly, but the bullets vanished into the storm, swallowed by the red mist. Marius felt his heart pounding, and for the first time, he realized it was no longer his own rhythm. It belonged to something else, something vast and ancient. A pain spread across his chest like invisible claws digging into his soul. He fell to his knees, gasping as the voice returned, calm and deep. "Do you feel it now? The truth within your rage?" Marius wanted to deny it, but part of him already knew the answer. Anger gave him strength. Fury made him unbreakable. The voice promised that if he surrendered fully, he would become more than human. He would become eternal. When he opened his eyes, the storm had vanished, and the plain was quiet again. But the silence was worse than the noise. The surviving soldiers stood in perfect stillness, their armor marked with runes that burned faintly red. They looked at Marius, waiting. He could see the reflection of his own glowing eyes in their visors. He wanted to speak, to command, but no words came. Somewhere deep within him, something laughed. Not in mockery, but in triumph. He realized, too late, that the corruption had already begun.